Sarah sat alone at a small round table inside a quiet cafe on the edge of town. The place was warm and smelled like fresh coffee and baked bread, but she felt cold inside. Her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, yet she barely noticed the heat. Outside the large window, people walked by with shopping bags, laughing and talking, moving forward with their lives. Sarah watched them, feeling like she was standing still while the world kept going. She wasn't unhappy all the time, but there were moments like this, when the silence felt too heavy and the space across from her chair felt far too empty. 3 years ago, that seat was never empty. Her husband used to sit there, teasing her about drinking tea instead of coffee, smiling in a way that made her feel safe. Then one bad day changed everything. An accident, a phone call, a hospital hallway that smelled like fear. After that day, Sarah learned how to breathe again, how to wake up and keep going, even when her heart felt cracked. She had to, because she had children who depended on her, 3 boys who needed her to be strong, even when she felt weak. Ethan, Noah, and Leo were her triplet sons. They were 10 years old now, growing fast, asking big questions, noticing more than Sarah realized. They looked almost the same, with the same brown hair and curious eyes, but their hearts were different. Ethan was quiet and thoughtful, the kind of boy who listened more than he spoke and thought deeply before saying anything. Noah was serious and protective, always watching over his brothers, feeling like it was his job to keep everyone safe. Leo was gentle and hopeful, the one who believed things could get better even when they seemed broken. The boys were sitting at another table in the cafe, pretending to work on homework. Their notebooks were open, pencils resting on the pages, but their eyes kept drifting back to their mom. They noticed how she stared into her tea, how her shoulders looked heavy, how she hadn't smiled since they walked in. They had seen that look before. It was the look she wore when she thought no one was watching, when the memories came back quietly and sat beside her. "She's sad again," Leo whispered, leaning closer to his brothers. Ethan adjusted his glasses and nodded slowly. "She tries not to show it, but I can tell." Noah clenched his jaw. "She always says she's fine, but she's not." The boys loved their mom more than anything. She worked long hours, packed their lunches, helped with homework, and kissed their heads every night before bed. She never complained. But children notice things adults think they hide, and these boys noticed the empty space in their mom's life, the missing laughter, the way she sometimes paused when she saw other families together. That was when Ethan noticed the man standing near the counter. He was holding a cup of coffee, shifting his weight from one foot to the other like he wasn't sure where he belonged. He looked around the cafe, then down at his phone, then around again. He seemed lost, not just in the room, but inside himself. When his eyes passed over Sarah for a second, there was something familiar in his expression, the same quiet sadness. "That guy looks lonely," Ethan said softly. Leo followed his gaze. "Like Mom," he whispered. Noah watched carefully. "He looks nice, just tired." The boys sat quietly for a moment, an idea slowly forming between them without any of them saying it out loud. Leo was the first to speak, his voice barely louder than the hum of the cafe. "What if we help her?" Ethan frowned. "Help her how?" Leo swallowed. "What if we pretend?" Noah turned to him. "Pretend what?" Leo leaned in closer. "Pretend he's our dad." Ethan's eyes widened. "That's lying. We're not supposed to lie." Leo nodded quickly. "Just for a little bit, just so Mom doesn't feel alone." Noah looked back at Sarah. She was still staring into her cup, lost in thought. "She deserves to smile," he said quietly. Ethan hesitated. He liked rules. He liked doing the right thing. But he loved his mom more than rules. "Just for a minute," he said finally. "Then we stop." Before doubt could take over, Leo stood up and walked toward the man. His heart was beating fast, but he didn't stop. He gently tugged on the man's jacket. "Dad?" Leo said softly. The man froze. He looked down, confused. "I'm sorry?" he said. Noah and Ethan stepped beside Leo. "You said you'd sit with us," Noah said, trying to sound serious, even though his hands were shaking. The man's eyes widened. He looked around, clearly unsure what was happening. At that moment, Sarah looked up and saw her sons standing with a stranger. Her heart jumped into her throat. "Boys," she said quickly, standing up, "what are you doing?" The man turned to her, embarrassed. "I think there's been a mistake. I don't want to cause any trouble." "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, rushing over. "Their father passed away. Sometimes they get confused." Leo looked up at the man with hopeful eyes. "Can you just sit with us for a minute, please?" The man hesitated. Something in the boy's voice, something honest and fragile, made it hard to say no. "Just for a minute," he said gently. They sat together at the table. Sarah felt awkward and nervous, but the boys seemed relieved. The man introduced himself as Mark. His voice was calm and kind. He said he worked nearby and often came to the cafe when he didn't want to go home to an empty apartment. The boys started talking, filling the silence with stories about school, baseball, and their favorite movies. Mark listened carefully, smiling, asking questions, never interrupting. Sarah noticed how patient he was, how he didn't rush the moment or make it strange. Slowly, the tight feeling in her chest began to ease. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like someone was sharing the space beside her, not replacing anyone, not trying to fix her pain, just sitting with it. When it was time to leave, Leo looked at Mark and asked, "Will we see you again?" Mark smiled. "I'd like that." That night, as Sarah tucked the boys into bed, Ethan spoke softly. "We lied today." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. "Why did you do it?" Noah answered first. "Because you were lonely." Leo smiled sleepily. "Sometimes families start in strange ways." Sarah hugged them tightly, tears falling quietly. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt a small light turning on in the dark. The next morning, Sarah woke up before her alarm. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually made her feel alone, but today it felt different. Her mind kept going back to the cafe, to the way the boys had laughed, to the sound of Mark's voice, calm and kind, like someone who didn't rush life. She shook her head softly, telling herself not to think too much about it. It had only been a moment, just tea, just a stranger being polite. Still, something about it stayed with her as she got out of bed and started her day. Down the hallway, the boys' room was a mess of blankets and pillows. Ethan was already awake, reading quietly. Noah was half asleep, his arms stretched across the bed like he was guarding it. Leo slept curled up, smiling in his dreams. Sarah stood there for a second, watching them, feeling the familiar mix of love and worry. She wondered if she had done the right thing by letting them talk to a stranger. She wondered if she had let herself hope too easily. Then she reminded herself that nothing had changed. Life was still the same. School lunches to pack, work to get to, bills to pay. At breakfast, the boys talked more than usual. Leo kept smiling for no reason. Noah asked what time they would go to the cafe again. Ethan stayed quiet, but Sarah noticed how he listened carefully, thinking. "We're not going back just to see him," Sarah said gently. "That was just a coincidence." Leo poked his cereal. "But he said he wanted to see us again." "He was just being nice," Sarah replied, though she wasn't fully sure herself. That afternoon, Sarah finished work feeling tired. The day had been long, full of small problems and big responsibilities. On her way home, she found herself driving past the cafe without planning to. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She told herself she was just tired, that she needed tea, that it meant nothing. Still, she parked the car. Inside, the cafe looked the same warm lights, the same smell of coffee. Sarah ordered tea and chose a table near the window. The boys sat across from her, looking around eagerly. "He might not come," whispered Ethan. That time passed, and Mark slowly became a familiar part of their lives, like a song that first plays softly in the background and then becomes something you hum without noticing. He never showed up without asking. He never tried to act like he owned a place in their home. Instead, he waited, listened, and followed Sarah's lead. That made her feel safe. After years of having to make every decision alone, it felt good to share small choices, like what movie to watch or which park to visit on a Sunday afternoon. The boys grew more comfortable around him with each visit. Noah watched carefully, testing him in quiet ways. If Mark promised to show up, Noah noticed whether he kept his word. When Mark said he would come at 5, he came at 5. When he said he would help with homework, he sat patiently until the boys understood. Little by little, Noah stopped standing so stiffly, like a guard who never rests. He started to laugh more, to trust that not everything bad would happen again. Ethan liked talking to Mark in the evenings. They would sit at the kitchen table with a lamp on, the rest of the house quiet. Ethan asked thoughtful questions about life, about work, about how adults deal with fear. Mark never laughed at the questions or brushed them aside. He answered honestly, using simple words. When he didn't know an answer, he said so. Ethan respected that more than any perfect reply. Leo followed Mark everywhere when he visited. He asked endless questions, told long stories, and shared big dreams about the future. He talked about becoming a pilot, a teacher, a baseball player, all in the same afternoon. Mark listened to every dream like it mattered. Leo noticed that. It made him feel important. Sarah watched all of this quietly. Sometimes she felt happy. Sometimes she felt scared. She worried about letting her heart open again. She worried about the boys getting hurt if things changed. At night, when the house was quiet, she sat on the edge of her bed and thought about the past and the future at the same time. She missed her husband, and that missing never went away. But she was also learning that loving again didn't mean forgetting. It just meant growing. As weeks turned into months, the changes in their lives became easier to see, not because everything was perfect, but because the hard days didn't feel so heavy anymore. Sarah still worked long hours, still worried about money and school and the future, but now there was someone who asked how her day went and truly waited for the answer. Mark didn't try to solve every problem. Sometimes he just listened, and that was enough to make Sarah feel understood. The boys began to include Mark in their routines without even thinking about it. They asked him to come to school events, to watch their baseball practice, to sit beside them during movie nights. Mark never missed an important moment. When he couldn't be there, he explained why and made sure the boys knew it wasn't because they didn't matter. Noah noticed this the most. He watched how Mark respected their time and their feelings, and slowly the wall Noah had built around his heart began to lower. One afternoon, while they were cleaning the garage together, Ethan asked a question that had been sitting inside him for a long time. He looked at Mark seriously and said, "Do you ever feel scared that something good might disappear?" Mark paused, thinking carefully. "Yes," he said honestly, "but I've learned that being scared doesn't mean we stop loving. It just means we love carefully." Ethan nodded, feeling like someone finally understood the thoughts he kept quiet. Leo showed his feelings in simpler ways. He drew pictures of the family at school, adding Mark into the drawings without being asked. He smiled more at night and fell asleep faster. Once, when Sarah tucked him in, he whispered, "I like when Mark is here. The house feels warm." Sarah kissed his cheek, holding back tears. There were still difficult moments. One night, the boys talked about their father, sharing memories and laughing softly. Sarah felt the old ache in her chest, sharp and sudden. Mark sat quietly, letting the boys speak, honoring the man they loved. Later, Sarah thanked him for that. "He'll always be part of us," she said. Mark nodded. "He should be." That respect made Sarah trust him more. She realized that love didn't have to erase the past to make room for the future. It could hold both. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Sarah and Mark sat on the porch watching the stars. The night was quiet, and the air was cool. Sarah took a deep breath. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she said. "Not after everything." Mark looked at her gently. "I didn't either," he replied. "But here we are." Inside the house, 3 boys slept peacefully, unaware that the small choices they made in a cafe had slowly changed their lives. They didn't know about the fear Sarah still felt, or the careful hope growing in Mark's heart. They only knew that their home felt safer now, warmer, fuller. Life didn't suddenly become easy. Problems still came, bad days still happened, but now, when something went wrong, they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Time kept moving forward, the way it always does, quiet and steady, never asking if people are ready. Seasons changed outside their home. Leaves fell, snow came, and then spring returned again. Inside the house, the changes were slower but deeper. Laughter became normal instead of rare. Even on hard days, there was a feeling that no one was facing things alone anymore. One afternoon, the boys came home from school quieter than usual. Sarah noticed right away. She asked if everything was okay, but they said yes and went to their room together. Later that evening, Noah came into the kitchen where Sarah and Mark were cooking dinner. He stood there for a long moment, thinking. "Can I ask something?" he said. Sarah turned off the stove. "Of course." Noah took a breath. "Is Mark staying?" The question hung in the air, heavy but honest. Sarah looked at Mark, then back at Noah. She knelt down so she was at eye level. "Nothing in life is promised forever," she said gently. "But Mark isn't going anywhere. He chooses us every day." Noah nodded slowly, like he was letting something finally rest inside his heart. That night, Ethan asked his own question. "If someone loves us, does that mean they can still leave?" Mark thought carefully before answering. "People can leave, but love is real even if it doesn't last forever. What matters is how we treat each other while we're here." Ethan seemed satisfied, like a puzzle piece had clicked into place. Leo didn't ask questions. He simply climbed into Mark's lap during movie night and fell asleep there, trusting without fear. A few months later, on a quiet weekend morning, Sarah watched the boys playing in the backyard while Mark fixed a loose fence board. The sun was warm, the moment felt ordinary, and that's when Sarah realized something important. Ordinary had once felt impossible. Peace had once felt too